the Terrifying Lies podcast with music and stories by Craig Nybo. Greetings, friends. Welcome to the Terrifying Lies podcast, where we like to go down to forbidden wastelands, where only the most unfortunate souls walk the macadam of scorched earth and shattered dreams. I'm Craig Nybo, your host. Before we dive into today's story, I want to let you know about what you will receive by backing the Terrifying Lies podcast. You can get behind the show by visiting patreon.com/terrifyinglies. A monthly backer level of $4.99 per month gets you access to the entire season of stories and songs, ad and commentary free. That means you can listen to the stories without hearing me ramble on and on about this, that, and the other thing. For a monthly donation of $9.99, I will send you a season t-shirt at the end of each season, along with a special gift from my store. Could be a book, could be a game, could be anything. Just whatever tickles my fancy. Any way you crack it, you get something cool shipped directly to your home. If you enjoy the podcast, why not get behind it for less than half of a McDonald's meal each month? Believe me, your small contribution goes a long way. Again, you can back the podcast by visiting patreon.com/terrifyinglies. Enough of that, let's get on with the story. After all, it's a good one. Today, I present Part 9 of Red Annex. If you haven't listened to Parts 1 through 8, I encourage you to go back to the beginning of the season. Otherwise, you might find yourself scratching your head. Previously on Red Annex, a devastating virus spreads across the country that causes madness and the almost insatiable appetite for human flesh. To fight the sickness, the president annexes the most contagious parts of the United States by throwing up walls. The most prominent annex wraps around the San Fernando Valley, where a self-proclaimed journalist has managed to livecast disturbing video from inside the annex. The president sends a U.S. Army Special Forces team into the annex to recon and rescue as many survivors as possible. As they converge at the landing zone for evacuation, only to find an onslaught of infected hostiles, can they fight their way out of the annex and return home with their vaccinated test subjects in time? You'll have to listen to find out. We'll plow straight from the story into the music without interruption. Be sure to stick around for a bit of commentary. See you on the other side. Chapter 25, Extraction plus 8 minutes. Peltier, Tuttle. "Let's move," Tuttle ordered, but he knew that the crowd of refugees could only travel as quickly as its slowest member. He split his attention between the horde of dogs up on the hill and the Chinook dead ahead. One of the dogs touched off a shot. The bullet thunked into the ground feet from Peltier. "Everybody down," Tuttle shouted. The refugees hit the dirt. Peltier drew Gracie in under her body. The little girl sobbed and hugged her plush unicorn close. "It's gonna be okay. Do just what I tell you, and we'll get both you and Mr. Twinkles out of here safe and sound." Gracie's tears subsided a little. Peltier hoped she could keep her promise to the little girl. More shots reported from the knoll's crest. One of the refugees, buried deep in the group, screamed out a shrill of agony. Tuttle pushed up to a knee, aimed, and opened fire, sending several 3-round bursts toward the hostiles. Chapter 26, Extraction plus 10 minutes. Melvick, Tordoff, Orton, Wills, Wilmore, Giesing, Henry. Tordoff watched Langevin through the optics of her M240 machine gun. Someone in the infected mob fired. Other hostiles followed suit, letting their guns rain. Several MK-16 bursts hammered from the group of refugees across the park. Either Tuttle or Peltier had opened up on the railside hostiles. "Send them a warning burst," Melvick said. "Let's try to shut them up." Tortoff aimed above the hostiles and sent 2 seconds of sustained fire over their heads. All of the hostiles, except for Langevin, ducked for cover, with only the rail to protect them. Langevin raised his arms and shouted orders at his following. Tortoff couldn't make out the words from this distance, but she got the gist of it. Langevin intended to whip up his 100-strong colt into a frenzy. One by one, members of Langevin's flock found courage in whatever he preached. In parcels and pieces, they stood up. More MK-16 chatter came from the refugees. Peltier and Tuttle kept the pressure on, but the hostiles drew new courage from their leader. The hordes surged into action, climbing over the rail, pouring out around the sides, clambering any way they could down from the knoll toward the field. More of them came than Tortoff expected. They must have been gathering up there, drawing nerve from their increasing numbers. "Fire at will," Melvick ordered. Tortoff put 3 rounds into Langevin's chest. The journalist crumpled over the rail and hung ass up. Rivulets of blood ran from his collar, over his face, and dripped into the dirt. "Let's go," Orton said. He, Wills, Wilmore, Giesing, and Henry dug into the inexhaustible source of energy every Special Forces soldier possesses and ran down the Chinook's rear ramp into battle. Orton ordered the small squad to move into a skirmish line. They fired at the approaching hostiles as they locked into formation. The mob of diseased broke into 2 groups. Half advanced toward the Chinook, the rest tumbled in a massive gallop toward the Christian Center refugees. Those who had firearms opened them up in an uproar of disorganized, untrained gunplay mayhem. Chapter 27, Extraction plus 12 minutes, Peltier, Tuttle. Peltier protected Gracie's little body as enemy fire sizzled overhead. She caged the little girl in like a turtle shell. Little time remained before the advancing force would engage the refugees. Peltier couldn't waste those precious seconds protecting one child. She knelt up and raised her MK-16. Gracie bawled and clutched at her, trying to pull her back down. "Shh, Peltier said, placing a hand on the little girl's chest. Gracie hugged Mr. Twinkles close. Her sobs slacked up. "That's a brave girl." Peltier raised her hand to support her aim. She estimated that better than 60 dogs sprinted across the field, firing weapons wildly in the air like bandits in an obscure Western movie. Tuttle touched off another burst. The man in the front of the pack collapsed. The crowd trampled him underfoot. Peltier took calming breaths as she engaged in the business of killing. She set her rifle to single-shot mode for increased control. She aimed and fired. A young man wearing a sports jersey and flat-billed baseball cap crumpled to the grass. She fired again. A middle-aged woman, her hair tousled into wiry brambles, grabbed her chest, took a knee, and whined out her last breath in a graceless shrill. Peltier glanced down at Gracie. The little girl's eyes widened with unalloyed fear. "It's gonna be okay, sweetie," Peltier smiled. She moved a wayward lock of hair from the little girl's face. She aimed and fired again. An overweight man stuffed into an expensive tracksuit lost half of his face. He stuttered sideways a handful of steps and thumped down hard. Both Peltier and Tuttle ignored shots fired by the infected contingency. They kept low and remained calm. They couldn't afford to think about the swarm of slugs hissing overhead. "There are too many of them," Tuttle said as he sent another burst into the crowd. He knew it would come down to hand-to-hand combat, and he didn't like the look of the pipes, 2x4s, baseball bats, wrenches, and knives he spotted scattered throughout the dog tribe. Small weapons fire cracked from somewhere behind Tuttle. He glanced over his shoulder and spotted Tattoos brandishing the Beretta M9 he had given him back at the Christian Center. Tattoos fired loose and lazy. The M9's recoil bucked off his aim with every shot, but the man made a valiant effort. "Both hands," Tuttle shouted. "Hold it as tight as you can. Take your aim and place your shots." Tattoos nodded, trying to hide the terror in his eyes. He clamped down hard on the pistol with both hands, aimed, and fired. The gun bounced out of alignment again. They had seconds before the dogs would close the gap. Peltier and Tuttle resumed fire, both readying themselves for a brawl. Chapter 28, Extraction plus 31 minutes, Watson and Pitts. Watson and Pitts approached the firefight at the extraction point. They advanced in balanced measures into the area. They crested a railed knoll and spotted the Chinook below, waiting where it had dropped them off just 2 hours earlier. Several hostiles lay dead on the sidewalk that ran along the knoll's brow. One man hung over the folded handrail that ran the length of the walkway. Blood poured from a chest wound and watered the flowers growing on the other side. Watson and Pitts looked over an ensuing fight down in the park. At least 80 hostiles, split into two groups, advanced half toward the Chinook, half toward a group of refugees 200 yards to the rear of the helicopter. Peltier and Tuttle did what they could to protect the prone refugees against scores of advancing enemy. At the Chinook, 5 soldiers, Captain Orton among them, stood their ground, exchanging fire with a multitude of at least 50 infected men and women. 7 of us down there, Watson said. Counting us, that makes 9. Where are the other 3? Pitts couldn't think about it. His mission was supposed to be easy. Get in, vaccinate as many people as possible, fly them home. He hadn't expected a clash. Tack, 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 tack. An M240 reported from the Chinook's starboard gun port. Pitts broke from his reverie. Most of the hostiles didn't carry firearms. Those with guns shot ineffectively, but their numbers balanced out lack of skill. Although Orton's crew, as well as Peltier and Tuttle, made inroads into the enemy numbers, in the end, it would come down to a bone-on-bone shitstorm. The infected horde showed no will to live. They meant to overrun the Chinook and the refugees at any cost. "We gotta move," Watson said. "If those jackasses make it to Tuttle and Peltier, they'll cut those refugees apart with machetes and pipes." But an even larger troop of ad hoc afflicted advanced toward the Chinook. Pitts glanced down at his 2 remaining RPG-7s. He and Watson had already spilled so much blood, and it was getting damn hard to sort sheep from goats. Pitts himself couldn't determine his own breed. Chapter 29, Extraction plus 33 minutes, Orton, Wills, Wilmore, Henry, Giesing. Orton heard the shot come at him before the slug thunked into his right forearm. He yelped and dropped his MK-16. He clutched his arm, trying to defuse the pain with sheer will. His rifle hit the grass. He heard someone shout something. Blurred by agony, he looked toward the voice. Wills had broken formation and was running toward him. Orton crouched to a knee, concerned more about the gunshot wound than the approaching hostiles. "You're gonna be okay," Wilson shouted over the noise as he looked over his CO's arm. "Get back to the chopper, we've got this from here." Orton's wits snapped back at Wills' suggestion to withdraw. He wasn't about to leave the fight to others. He reached for his MK-16, but his arm, shattered halfway from wrist to elbow, buckled over at an angle that confused him. Blood slickened his palm. He couldn't fight no matter how much he willed it. Wills pushed in, inches away and eye to eye with Orton. "It's okay, sir. We got this. Get into the Chinook and strap down." Orton nodded and pushed up to a crouch. He moved toward the rear of the Chinook. Knowing that Orton could get up the ramp on his own, Wills turned and ran back into the fight. Shots rang out all around Orton as he made his way to the VTOL's rear ramp. He glanced over his shoulder at the escalating situation. For a moment, he considered drawing his M9 with his offhand and getting to work, but his body forbade such action. He could barely move under the strain of so much agony. Orton swore to himself, turned, and moved toward the ramp. Chapter 30. Extraction plus 36 minutes. Pitts, Watson. Pitts raised one of the two remaining RPG-7s. He aimed into the larger of the two mobs. The group headed toward the Chinook. They'd have to deal with the faction advancing on Peltier and Tuttle next. He lifted the safety and pulled back the hammer. "Are you about to do this?" Watson asked. "Don't make me answer to you," Pitts said. "We're deep in this shit, all of us." Watson pursed his lips and nodded. Pitts pulled the trigger. The rocket left the barrel and ignited at a safe distance. Boosted by solid fuel, it jetted away toward the infected horde, leaving a trail of smoke in its wake. Kablam! The rocket exploded at about the center of the mass. Men and women flew like tossed dolls outward from the point of impact. Most of the others collapsed to the turf, looking for cover. Neither Pitts nor Watson celebrated the victory. Baser instincts overtook culpability. The rules of survival meant either the infected or the U.S. soldiers could live. Both parties could no longer persist. Chapter 31. Extraction plus 32 minutes. Orton, Henry, Wills, Giesing, Wilmore. Thunk hiss. Giesing knew the sound well. He'd heard it throughout his tours of Afghanistan. The dirtbags who had fired on the Chinook during insertion had made it to the extraction point. The now grounded double-rotor VTOL made an easy target from this distance. If the enemy had any skill at all, the helicopter would blow within the next 3 seconds, sending fuel, fire, and shrapnel in every direction. "Incoming!" Giesing shouted. As the RPG traced down from the knoll, everyone hit the sod, including many of the enemy. Orton grunted as he slammed down on the base of the ramp. He'd heard the RPG's signature report as well. He glanced down at his shattered arm. It twisted off to a contorted angle. He couldn't reconcile the shattered bones or the separation of tissue and flesh. He'd hit a terminal threshold of pain. Anything more couldn't make much difference. The rocket made contact. Giesing expected the helicopter to blow, but the RPG landed on another mark. He looked up from under his elbow just in time to see bodies cartwheeling away from ground zero almost directly in the center of the approaching consortium of infected animals. He smiled and glanced up at the knoll's summit. There stood Pitts and Watson. Giesing and Pitts often found themselves at odds, even exchanging blows on 2 occasions, but not today. "Hot damn, Pitts. I love you. You hear me? I love you." Orton managed to turn over onto his butt and use his good hand to push up to a sitting position at the bottom of the ramp. He looked over the damage wrought by the RPG. Not insignificant, but not enough to stop the infected advance either. He looked the other way across the park and, for the first time, recognized Peltier and Tuttle's nearly inescapable situation. Orton and his 4 men, tied up in their own fight, hadn't taken in the whole battlefield. Better than 50 infected pushed toward Peltier and Tuttle and their company of refugees. "Wilmore!" Orton shouted. Wilmore glanced back at his CO from where he crouched, still rattled from the RPG attack. "Take that saw and get some of that!" Orton gestured with his chin toward the multitude of diseased hostiles advancing on the refugees. Wilmore nodded and pushed up to his feet. He sprinted away. Orton swallowed a choke of pain hanging in his throat. He used his left hand to pull himself up, grasping the ramp's hydraulics. His grip slipped and he almost went down. It wasn't the viscosity of blood in his palm that caused him to slip. His strength had declined in degrees as he bled. He looked up at the top of the Chinook's rear ramp. "Might as well be Everest," he thought. He put one foot in front of the other and began his ascent. Chapter 32. Extraction plus 35 minutes. Pitts, Watson. Shots rang out somewhere behind Pitts and Watson. Before Pitts could process what had happened, Watson yelped and collapsed. Pitts looked back in time to see at least 4 hostiles, probably more, disappear behind stalled cars along Colorado Avenue. Pitts spotted the bastard who had probably shot Watson, a man dressed in a conservative business suit, leaning out from behind a maroon minivan with a rifle. More bullets came from unseen assailants. Hostiles bounced up and down like prairie dogs, popping off shots and diving for cover. Pitts raised the last RPG-7 and aimed at the minivan. He took off the safety and cocked the hammer. He set the sight and pulled the trigger. The RPG-7 clicked, but didn't fire. Shit. The misfire encouraged the enemy. Men and women emerged from behind abandoned traffic. Bullets flew. Shit, Pitts said. He hefted up Watson, not taking time to diagnose the severity of his friend's wound. Watson cried out in pain as Pitts threw him over his shoulder and ran for the end of the Knowles railing, the place where the sidewalk turned and descended into the park's lower level. A bullet ricocheted off Pitts' helmet, setting his ears a-ring. More incoming came from behind. Pitts imagined a crew of hostiles running out of cover and opening fire at his turned back as he fled. He made the edge of the railing, turned left, and descended the slanting sidewalk. Watson became heavier with every step. As Pitts pushed on, a childhood rhyme came to his mind. Before he knew it, he found himself chanting the verse over and over to the rhythm of his footfalls as he heaved Watson's weight. Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home. Your house is on fire and your children are gone. All except one, and her name is Anne, and she hid under the baking pan. Watson moaned as he bounced on Pitts' shoulder. For all Pitts knew, his friend stood at the gates of death. Damn him if he wouldn't get Pitts into the belly of the Chinook, just a football field away.
It's downright spooky when we're settling beneath the clouds. Truly unruly, and everything is thumping loud. We'll lamp profusely, cause everything is heading south. We'll stop the cruelty cruelty, cause we're gonna get the good ones out. Getting rowdy, from the skin to the bone, thumping loudly in this sickening show.
For Hot LZ, I went with a fast-paced tempo and a consistent groove. I intended to capture the confusion of our heroes entering a war zone and fighting their way out. I wrote the lyrics from the point of view of a pair of evac chopper pilots looking over the zone and taking in the hopelessness of the situation. This song also kind of acts as a metaphor for the world's chaos. Please get behind the podcast by visiting patreon.com/terrifyinglies and selecting a backer level. Just a few bucks every month helps keep the show on the air. Here's the best part. We still have 4 episodes left before we reach the season finale. I encourage you to come back. Bring your friends. Descend into these pits of madness with me. Who knows? You might leave a little bit of your sanity behind. And honestly, who truly wants to be entirely sane? Until next time, I bid you sweet dreams. Or should I say, sweet nightmares.
This has been the Terrifying Lies podcast. Please come again. You're welcome here.